It is a late morning in the Shire. The sun shines bright over green hills and quiet gardens, but inside Bag End, the world feels heavier. Frodo Baggins listens, wide-eyed, as Gandalf the Grey weaves a tale of darkness, power, and of a creature twisted by the ring. Then why didn't he track Bilbo further? Asked Frodo. Why didn't he come to the Shire? Ah, said Gandalf, now we come to it. I think Gollum tried to. He set out and came back westward, as far as the Great River, but then he turned aside. He was not daunted by the distance, I'm sure. No, something else drew him away, so my friends think, those that hunted him for me. Gollum had turned away from the Shire in his pursuit of Bilbo, but not to safety. He had followed another pull, one far more terrible. But I am afraid there is no possible doubt. He had made his slow, sneaking way, step by step, mile by mile, south, down at last to the land of Mordor. A heavy silence fell in the room. Frodo could hear his heart beating. Even outside, everything seemed still. No sound of Sam's shears could now be heard. Yes, to Mordor, said Gandalf. Alas, Mordor draws all wicked things, and the dark power was bending all its will to gather them there. The ring of the enemy would leave its mark too, leave him open to the summons. What Tolkien reveals here is the dark power of Sauron calling out to wicked beings and drawing them to Mordor. Despite having been separated from the ring for some time, Gollum remained under its control and influence. This power erodes the free will of its victims, gradually turning them into servants of Sauron. Even if he didn't fully understand why the ring had left its mark on Gollum, it acted like a beacon calling out to its master and pulling its former bearer toward him. What must have been going on in Gollum's head during this time is anyone's guess, but it may have gone something like this.
Yes, west. West is the Shire. Where it is, where he took it from us. The Baggins! But no. The air smells wrong. The wind stings. Something calls. Something pulls. It burns, precious. It burns in our bones. We should go back, yes. Sneak back to the Shire. Take it back. Kill the fat hobbit. Yes. But our legs, our feet, they go south, always south. Why do they go there? Voices in the dark, calling, whispering, promising. They says they knows us, says they can help us. Lies. But we are so tired, so cold. The precious is close. We feels it, yes. We knows it. Something watches. Something waits. Not kind, not friendly, but it wants the same thing we want. The precious, we hates it. But we can't stop it. No. We goes. We must go. South. Always south. Into the teeth of the dark. Into the eye.
Side note, let me know how my Gollum impression was. Not the best, not the worst, but let me know in the comments. This will-breaking power is a recurring theme with Sauron. We see it most clearly in the Nazgul, who lose their humanity and become mindless extensions of his will. But it's also evident in other characters, such as the Mouth of Sauron, whose identity has been entirely consumed by his master's darkness. The rider was robed all in black, and black was his lofty helm. Yet this was no ringwraith, but a living man. The lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr he was, and his name is remembered in no tale, for he himself had forgotten it. And he said, I am the Mouth of Sauron. But it is told that he was a renegade, who came from the race of those that are named the Black Númenóreans, for they had established their dwellings in Middle-earth during the years of Sauron's domination, and they worshipped him, being enamored of evil knowledge. And he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again. And because of his cunning, he grew ever higher in the Lord's favor. And he learned great sorcery, and he knew much of the mind of Sauron, and he was more cruel than any orc. What stands out to me in this passage is how the Mouth of Sauron became so obsessed with dark magic and Sauron's influence that he gave up all parts of his own identity, even forgetting his own name. Very similar to Gollum in some ways. And this pattern continues the more you look. Sauron's forces aren't made up of loyalists, but rather slaves. Orcs are literally slaves of Mordor, and Tolkien even acknowledges that slavery is what makes up the majority of Sauron's hosts. Since his return to Mordor, Sauron had found the tower useful, for he had few servants, but many slaves of fear. Sauron's greatest weapon is not simply brute force, but domination, of mind, will, and identity. In many ways, he is an army of one who controls all others, similar to a hive mind. Even the ranks of his military are based on the degree of enslavement. Nazgul at the very top being mindless extensions of him. The mouth of Sauron in the middle, who is extremely loyal, but we also see him trying to negotiate with Gandalf to take Isengard for himself. So still some sense of individualism there. And at the bottom, orcs, who will even question the tactics of Sauron, but ultimately always serve him based on their deep fear of him and general attachment towards nasty things. And this power runs even deeper in the story than you may realize. Did you know Morgul weapons have a hidden curse that the movies missed? And because of this curse, Frodo's injury was far more dangerous than just becoming a ring wraith. It all begins with this quote from Gandalf to Frodo as the Hobbit recovers in Rivendell after his escape from the Black Riders across the ford of Bruinen. They tried to pierce your heart with a Morgul knife, which remains in the wound. If they had succeeded, you would have become like they are, only weaker and under their command. You would have become a wraith under the dominion of the Dark Lord, and he would have tormented you for trying to keep his ring, if any greater torment were possible than being robbed of it and seeing it on his hand. You probably know that a Morgul blade wound can turn its victim into a wraith, but there's something even more sinister about this injury, something revealed in Gandalf's words. If they had succeeded, you would have become like they are, only weaker and under their command. This is the hidden curse I'm talking about. And it's something that wasn't focused on in the film. What Gandalf is highlighting here is the horror of Frodo's potential fate. If the Morgul blade had struck its mark, Frodo wouldn't have become a true ringwraith like the Nazgul. Instead, he would have been reduced to something even worse. A slave to the ringwraiths, a puppet under their control. Frodo would have been trapped in a state of tortured existence. Not even fully in command of his own body, he'd have been a weaker, more vulnerable version of the ringwraiths, constantly controlled by them, carrying out their will under the shadow of the Dark Lord. His spirit would have been enslaved to those already enslaved by Sauron, a twisted irony of being forced to serve the very creatures he fought to escape. An immortal existence as a wraith would be torment enough, but being forced to become their servant and do their bidding makes it an even worse existence. It's even more tragic when you remember that it would have happened to a hobbit, arguably the most good-natured and innocent race in all of Middle-earth. Hobbits are known for their love of peace, quiet, and the simple pleasures of life. Good food, good company, and a calm, unhurried existence. To take all of that away from one of them, to force them into a world of violence, corruption, and servitude is truly heartbreaking. It feels like the ultimate violation of everything they stand for. In many ways, hobbits are everything the Nazgul are not. One represents innocence and joy, the other a relentless thirst for power and domination. What makes this contrast even more poignant is how it ties into a recurring theme in Tolkien's works. The idea that evil often arises as a twisted mockery of what is good. For example, Treebeard believed that trolls were created by the Dark Lord as a mockery of the Ents, the ancient guardians of the forest. Similarly, orcs were once elves, twisted and corrupted into hideous forms by dark powers. In the same way, the Nazgul are a grotesque corruption of mortal men, and Tolkien even states that hobbits are likely the closest to men in terms of ancestry. So in a way, the hobbits and the Nazgul represent the two extremes of men. The hobbits embody goodness, peace, and simplicity, while the Nazgul showcase the darkest path of corruption and loss of humanity. I'm not sure if this contrast and how it fits with the opposites of the other races was intentional by Tolkien, but it's certainly interesting to consider. It also adds to the terror of what a fatal stab from a Morgul blade would mean for a hobbit. Someone so pure and innocent, so far removed from the darkness of the world. The idea of that corruption taking root in such a gentle soul is even more horrifying. To wrap up this thought, we can all agree that no one likes the part of the story when Pippin offers a life of servitude to Denethor. It strikes us deeply, creating a visceral reaction. Now imagine the horror of a hobbit being forced to serve a Nazgul for eternity. The very idea feels even more devastating. Ultimately, I understand why this aspect was left out of the films. For the sake of streamlining the story, It wasn't deemed essential to emphasize that Frodo would have eventually become a lesser wraith, bound to serve the Nazgul. While it's a significant detail in the books, the filmmakers likely felt it wasn't crucial to the main narrative, especially when there are other more immediate threats and emotional stakes to focus on. The films prioritize the action and broader themes, and in that context, the subtlety of Frodo's fate as a wraith didn't add as much to the central story of the One Ring. Another dark power of the Morgul blades that doesn't get much attention is how fast they turn their victims into wraiths. Usually becoming a wraith is a gradual process that happens over time, after a person is given a ring of power, a slow corruption that unfolds over years or even centuries. When someone receives a ring, they are initially granted power, but over time the ring's influence consumes them. The individual's will slowly bends to the dominance of the ring and eventually to Sauron. As they use the ring, they lose their humanity, becoming more and more enslaved by its power. The exact timeline for someone to become a full-fledged ring wraith is unclear, but it likely takes decades or even centuries for the transformation to be complete. By the time a person is fully transformed, they lose their original identity completely. For Frodo, though, a Morgul blade would have turned him into a wraith much faster. Instead of taking decades or centuries, it would have happened in just a few weeks. It's pretty mind-blowing when you take a step back and think about how powerful the Nine Rings were, and even with their immense strength, they took years, sometimes centuries, to fully corrupt their wearers. The process was gradual, slowly breaking down their will and turning them into something far less than human. But then, when you look at the Morgul weapons, everything changes. The curse attached to these weapons doesn't waste time. It accelerates the corruption process at an incredible rate, making the transformation from human to wraith almost instantaneous compared to the slow, lingering torment of the rings. And even though Elrond managed to save Frodo from the worst of this fate, there were still lasting changes that couldn't be undone. Changes that Gandalf notices while sitting with Frodo. Gandalf moved his chair to the bedside and took a good look at Frodo. The color had come back to his face, and his eyes were clear and fully awake and aware. He was smiling, and there seemed to be little wrong with him. But to the wizard's eye, there was a faint change, just a hint, as it were, of transparency about him. Especially about the left hand lay outside upon the coverlet. Still, that must be expected, said Gandalf to himself. He is not halfway through yet, and what he will come into the end, not even Elrond can foretell. Not to evil, I think. He may become like a glass filled with a clear light for eyes to see that can. In that moment, Gandalf could see it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Frodo's being. A mark of the Morgul blade's lingering effect. Despite the outward signs of a recovery, something had changed in Frodo's essence. His smile was genuine, and his clarity returned, but the wound was more than just physical. It had touched something deeper within him. The faint transparency Gandalf sensed was a manifestation of Frodo's near encounter with the darkness. It wasn't something that could be seen easily, but it was there, an echo of the torment he had suffered. Gandalf's trained eyes saw the toll it had taken, and he understood the weight of what Frodo had experienced. Though Elrond had healed him, the deep, supernatural wound was not easily erased. It's as if a part of Frodo was stuck in the Wraith world permanently. Not so much that the common person could tell the difference, but to people with the gift of sight, it was unmistakable. Gandalf could sense the faint mist of that otherworldly realm lingering around Frodo, a shadow that would never fully lift. And even with the destruction of the One Ring, Frodo continues to feel the effects of his wounding at Weathertop, especially on the anniversary of that day. The physical pain of the old injury seems to resurface, and Frodo is reminded of the terror he experienced when the Nazgul attacked. This painful reminder also deepens his sense of dread and vulnerability, as the wound is a lasting mark of Sauron's evil. This anniversary brings back not only the physical toll, but also the emotional and spiritual weight of carrying the One Ring, and the evils he faced while doing so. This ultimately leads to Frodo's decision to leave Middle-earth. After all the hardships he endured, he struggles to feel at home again. The ring and the Morgul blade wound push Frodo into a state of existing between two worlds. When he returns to the Shire, he is no longer the same hobbit who set out on his journey. It's similar to the way war veterans sometimes struggle to readjust to civilian life. Frodo feels that things cannot go back to how they were. How could they, after carrying the weight of so much evil and trauma? To live with one foot in two worlds, bearing the memories of everything he faced becomes unbearable. While his decision to sail west is often attributed to the ring's influence, it is, in fact, the result of a combination of factors: his physical and emotional scars, the irrevocable change in him, and the toll of his journey. The Nazgul's ability to invoke fear is unparalleled. Unlike most enemies, they don't rely on physical might alone. Their power comes from an ability to corrupt and break the will of those they encounter. Their presence spreads terror not just in the moment, but in the way it twists the mind, filling individuals with a sense of hopelessness and dread that can linger long after they're gone. The Black Riders represent a form of darkness that has no mercy, no negotiation, no retreat. They are relentless, hunting down their prey with single-minded purpose, using the terror they instill to weaken and demoralize those in their path. But the true horror of the Nazgul is not only in their capacity to induce fear, it's in their ability to control and enslave. They can turn their victims into instruments of their master, turning people into wraiths, hollow shells of their former selves. The Morgul blades they carry are more than just weapons, they are conduits of domination. When the Nazgul strikes, it's not just about inflicting injury, they're delivering a curse that strips away the victim's humanity. Luckily, this wasn't the case for Frodo. With Elrond's help, he was able to recover, though the lingering effects of that wound stayed with him for the rest of his life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Middle-earth content.